Everyone, I'm Leslie Regal, Assistant Vice President of Civil Aviation at the Aerospace Industries Association, AIA. I first wanted to say thanks to our organizers, panelists, and viewers. We have a fun session for you. You might not know a ton about advanced air mobility or AAM, flying cars, eVTOLs, but we're here to explain a little bit about the technology, what they will do, and how they will radically change the way we transport ourselves and our goods in the future. We have an excellent panel from all areas of this exciting new aviation market. First, starting with Robin Lineberger, who is the leader of Deloitte's Aerospace and Defense Industry Practice. And for those who are interested in even more information about the topic of advanced air mobility, a little plug for the report that was issued late in January by AIA and Deloitte, Advanced Air Mobility, Can the US Afford to Lose the Race? Next, we have Selita Reynolds, General Manager at Los Angeles Department of Transportation. There are some extremely innovative things happening in LA, and I cannot wait to hear Selita's experience with these operations and plans for the future of her department. All right, and next we have Max Spenkel, the Policy and Government Affairs Lead at Joby Aviation. Joby is one of the most advanced, pardon the pun, new companies on the scene, recently acquired Uber Elevate, very bullish on advanced air mobility. So look forward to also hearing Max's perspective on everything. All right, so first, gonna open with a pretty obvious question to Max. What are we even talking about here? Are these flying cars?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me and Joby on the panel today, and really appreciate everyone's interest in the session. So I think it's really important to start kind of about Joby's beginning. We were founded in 2009 in Santa Cruz, California, and we were founded around the mission of really saving 1 billion people an hour a day. And so to do that, we've spent the last few years really designing what we feel is a great airplane. So we're building an all-electric piloted airplane that has 1 pilot and 4 passengers and can also take off and land vertically. So this is commonly referred to as an eVTOL, or electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And so we're building this plane, managing the operations, and building the underlying ecosystem that'll power the technology. And so as Leslie referred to, there's many companies around the world looking at this, and the AIA Deloitte report does a great job of overlaying the market for it. And so when we talk about AM broadly, it can include cargo or passenger carrying applications. And we're really seeing the next aviation revolution out here, which is powered by this electric engine, which is great for so many reasons. 0 emissions, quiet, and it's really gonna be able to move people and goods closer to where people wanna live and work. So AAM at its simplicity is the next generation of aviation. And it allows for, as I mentioned, 0 emissions travel and opportunities around what electric creates, which is this quiet and ultimately affordable means of transportation. So Joby, we're on track for FAA certification at the end of 2023 and operations beginning shortly thereafter. And because we're piloted, we're going through a standard FAA certification path known as the Part 23 certification path. And our airplane, therefore, is going to be able to operate in today's regulatory and operational environment. That means that once we're certified to operate, we can do so. So the early learnings will then inform these more mature operations, but we're really excited about being able to get out there and use today's existing regulatory authority for our initial operations.
All right, thanks so much, Max. So Selita, I've been to LA, not in the time of COVID, but I'm guessing road congestion hasn't improved too much. I can imagine that was part of the interest on LA's part to help alleviate traffic and avoid unnecessary vehicle emissions. But could you discuss how and why these technologies fit into your transportation plans at LA?
Sure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this with a group of folks who know a lot more than I do. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot in our conversation. The challenge with any new mode of transportation, especially one that is a huge sort of paradigm shift, like the one that Joby is envisioning and many other builders and operators, is that we don't have sort of the traditional tools at our disposal to try and understand deeply how will this change the way that people move around cities. What we know from opening up new rail lines like the Expo line just in the recent past is that transit, or adding another sort of high capacity connection for people, doesn't necessarily, you don't build those things to solve congestion. They may ease congestion, but they don't solve congestion. What they do instead is increase the overall number of people that you can move through a given corridor at a given time. Because traffic is sort of like air. There's this idea called induced demand that whenever you free up any capacity in a constrained system, it quickly gets backfilled by people who might have decided that, I'm not going to take that trip in the morning because the freeways are too congested, and all of those kinds of decisions that people make. So as we look at sort of how will urban air mobility change the experience of getting around Los Angeles, I think about two things primarily. The first one is the way that goods movement, that your shampoo and your groceries and your, the lumber for your project all get delivered now is usually enabled by an app that you have on your smartphone. And that explosion in sort of small urban goods movement that's happened over the last 5 or 10 years is one that we're still sort of trying to get our arms around and really understand. But we know that it's increased congestion, it's potentially increased the number of crashes that happen on streets, because anytime traffic goes up, crashes go up. So I'm really interested in the way that urban air mobility can kind of remove some of that traffic turbulence on the ground to free it up for us to use in other ways. And then the other thing that's, I think, a more intriguing proposition is how can we make sure that people who currently do not have good transportation options benefit the most from the introduction of something like urban air mobility? So we know that, business travelers that have budgets to get in one of these, to take them to downtown from LAX, is a clear market for many of the folks who are operating and building out these aircraft and these services. But what about the folks that, live in the far reaches of the valley, because that's the only place they could afford a home, but their commute requires them to spend hours either on transit or stuck in traffic? How can we give time back to those folks who are currently sort of paying a disproportionate tax, either through their time or on their household budgets because of transportation? Is that an arena that the public sector could begin to consider actually investing in ourselves to make sure that some of those services reach people who are currently sort of treated inequitably in the systems that we've built out today? But the last thing I'll say is, one of the reasons why Los Angeles is so deeply invested in this and interested and involved is because I can see that this is a new golden age of air travel. The amount of money being invested in this sector is, orders of magnitude more than my municipal transportation budget. I know it's coming. I know that if I don't have a seat at the table, I'll be on the menu. So our work is really to make sure that, the city voice and the people who live in cities that our city council represents can be heard when decisions are being made about what does the service look like and where should it go and where should we put infrastructure, because I think that will add tremendous value and really make it so that these companies can succeed in a way that doesn't add to some of the inequalities we're experiencing, but actually begins to alleviate them.
That's a really good point, Selita. And I think it's a good segue to what Robin's going to talk about. As I mentioned in the intro, AIA and Deloitte recently released a study on the market potential for AAM. Robin, can you talk briefly about some of the high-level findings of the report?
Absolutely. And we did the report so that we can inform and really get a good look and inform the industry as to how we'll progress over time and what the benefits would be, socioeconomic benefits. And some of the key takeaways are this. First is we expect to see the kinds of technologies that we're discussing here, urban air mobility, large cargo and human-sized air taxis, if you will, deployed at reasonable scale sometime between 2035 and 2040. So, and there's a strategy or an approach to roll through that, which starts with many of the services discussed here earlier, some of the smaller cargo delivery, replacing the automotive, more in the last mile point to point, progressing into larger payloads, ultimately developing and proving out the systems that would allow us to send larger payloads or cargo the weight that would now support the kind of things Max talked about, which is a piloted vehicle with 3 or 4 passengers. So those services across a wide spectrum of services, and of course those activities could be migrated to the technologies used for public safety, fire rescue, health delivery, meds delivery. You think about post hurricane, tornado, earthquake, those sorts of things to more rapidly respond and be able to support the public sector as well. So it's not only a commercial play, but in the public sector. We look at that, so that in a sense, the social part of that. The economic part of it is quite compelling, that if the market evolves as we expect it to, we could be looking as much as $150 billion a year, $150 billion a year in 2035. To put that in context, that's a 0.5 point on GDP. It represents about a 30% growth for the traditional and the aviation market as exists today. And then a little bit of what Selita talked about is there's also the job creation part, right? That not only improving the transit, but offering creating job opportunities to work in this new and interesting and high-tech industry. As many as 280,000 jobs in the US could be created as the market begins to build and scale. So not only the logistics benefits, the social benefits, which by the way, we talked about traffic, in today's world, in a pre-electrification world, in a high carbon world, removing or eliminating incremental carbon-based vehicles, cars and others has that benefit as well. And then looking at, as Max talked about, these electric aircraft won't be net emitters as they operate out there as well.
Yeah, so kind of taking off of that, the environmental impact and other things, Selita, noise and local air quality are strong concerns for many cities, especially I would think LA. Can you discuss what the impact will be of AAM on the individuals who are actually on the grounds?
Yeah, it was very interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had a sharp drop off in overall sort of travel. The only people moving around the city were essential workers, and many of them abruptly lost their jobs in the service industry and actually ended up beginning to drive as a job. So driving for Postmates or Caviar, because those were the jobs that were available. But we saw a huge improvement in our air quality in that one moment, but really quickly swung back to another string of bad air days. And the work that I've seen on it lays out the reasons for that are primarily around goods movement associated with the port. So even though passenger cars were mostly removed from the roads, and the tailpipe emissions that are such a huge contributor to greenhouse gas and sort of poor air quality were out of the equation for a short period of time, they were more than made up for by all of the goods that were moving as people began to shift to ordering things online in even greater numbers, as sort of an acceleration of an existing trend. So when I think about urban air mobility and I think about electrification and I think about all the work that the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach have been doing over many decades to try and clean up the operations and sort of the movement of heavy freight, I think about that as a potential for a huge improvement in our air quality, is if we were able to shift some of that to clean sort of all electric, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, that could really begin to pinpoint a source of emissions that is going to be very difficult for us to get at in many other, in a lot of the more traditional and sort of other ways that we work on these things. Noise is one that, when you ask people what they think about flying cars or what they think about urban air mobility, the things that come back most frequently are noise. So people are very sensitive to noise in Los Angeles. It's got a very busy airspace already. And the Los Angeles Police Department has one of the largest law enforcement fleets of traditional helicopters anywhere in the United States. That they built up over many years to try and, get places quickly and deal with traffic, among other sort of law enforcement strategies. So it's already a pretty noisy airspace. And people are curious and concerned about adding to that with, dozens of aircraft moving up ahead, overhead. The other two things that come up are views. So, what happens when, you're not able to just sort of look up into the sky and see it sort of uncrowded, and birds is the other one that comes up. These are the things you don't find out unless you ask. Birds would not have occurred to me, but they're a keen concern for Angelenos when you ask them about urban air mobility. So we know that noise is something that we need to really think about if we are going to gain public acceptance for a technology that has the potential to solve a lot of challenges that we have. So we're trying to figure out what is a wise way to go about that, given that there are, I don't know, Max probably knows, or Robin knows better than I do. Last count, it was, over 60 different types of aircraft that different companies are currently in the process of building. Joby has their design, but then there are lots of other designs out there, and they all come with slightly different noise profiles. And so can we begin to think about a smart strategy that offers, takeoff and landing at certain regional hubs for noisier aircraft, but then maybe a more distributed network of takeoff and landing sites for quieter aircraft? And we actually created some, they're called oralization scenarios, to actually let people experience what it might be like to stand on the corner of Sunset and Vermont and have, multiple aircraft moving overhead. Sunset and Vermont is really close to a medical center. And we know that, telehealth and sort of remote health is one potential use case. So we're trying to help demystify it for people and help them, give them something they can touch and feel, because what is a definition of noisy, right? It's a very personal sort of subjective thing. So we're trying to really hone in on that to inform the kinds of policies we make that will have direct implications on the use cases that this technology can serve.
Okay, thanks for that. It allows people to really kind of get into what they would view if they were sitting on the ground looking up at the sky, just kind of facing a new reality. So Max, AAM was formerly known as UAM. Again, it's a industry who loves acronyms, but both Robin and Selita said it's not just for the inner cities where you would think. Did they miss any operations that you would see your aircraft operating in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to touch on something Selita referenced as well about noise, I think noise for Joby is really important because we recognize that we want to be able, as I said, to be this mission-driven company around zero emissions, quiet aviation. So we've really prioritized noise as one of our top priorities as a company. And I think we've been fairly public about some claims about being 100 times quieter than a helicopter. And our data is really there to prove that, so that we can get closer to where people live and work and really become a part of their daily lives and their travels. When it comes to the kind of use cases you referenced, I think we recognize that every city is going to be a little different in the use cases for it. So a city like LA might line up differently than another city, but that's what's really interesting about this technology is the partnerships we're building on the state and local level to ensure that we integrate into their city the best. And Selita and the team at LA have done some fantastic work, as well as other cities around the country, to really ensure that this technology can integrate into the fold of their city. I think for us, we look at the way that people commute historically, and if you give me a moment to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, but there's a thing called the Marchetti Constant that says over time, people like to commute historically about 30 minutes. And that's changed as technology's changed. So at the beginning, it was ancient Romans and walking. And so the way the city was set up, about 1.5 miles perimeter, because that was about a 30-minute commute. And then you got to horseback, which allowed it to go to about 2.5 miles. Then you had cities set up around the train, like New York and Chicago, which extended that further. And then Atlanta is a great example of a car city, which gets you about 15 miles in 30 minutes based off traffic. So what urban air, advanced air mobility, eVTOL will allow for is about 80 miles in 30 minutes. So what it's really doing is extending that perimeter out even further and allowing people to live where they want to live and work where they want to work. So it's a more nodal form of travel. So as you look at that, it sets up different use cases based off it. So as you look at a city and look at what's within about 80 miles of it, it really allows people to live where they want to live, work where they want to work. And then you can work off different inter and intra-city use cases from there. So I think we're really excited about all of the different possibilities for this and fully recognize that it's not just quote unquote urban air mobility, it's rural, it's regional, it's inter, it's intra, and really excited for about how we can integrate into different cities, the fabric of each city themselves.
All right. Yeah. So Joby is a great example of a new entrant. Robin, the AAM industry is very unique because it brings together so many different new entrants with what we think of as an oligopoly market of aviation and aerospace, the more traditional players. Can you discuss how this is played out?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing, and it's interesting, we talked about the different use cases. So if you think of urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, across the range of use cases, small vehicles to the larger vehicles for people or cargo, large cargo, like Max was just describing. So there lies one of the reasons there's so many different aircraft designs to serve these different use cases, size of payload, distance traveled, and all of that. Something that correlates to that is we're seeing a range of non-traditional players come from venture-backed small startups to fit niche up to not only the traditional aviation providers, but new market entrants such as automotive companies or major tech investment coming from a major tech firm behind one of the larger vehicles. And it kind of correlates to the amount of time, capital, and challenge associated with design, developing, building, and getting certified in aircraft, with a larger capital investment on the heavier payloads, longer haul, bigger aircraft, whereas there's place for non-traditional players with smaller capital appetites, if you will, to start serving the lower market. So we're sort of seeing across that range of vehicles a very different face of who's involved in the marketplace. And then as we think about that, we should be comparing and thinking more around today what we'd call the civil aviation market rather than the airline market and the type of aircraft that we move around on today regionally across the country or from one continent to another, but more of the smaller civil aviation single engine type aircraft that are at a much call it a much lower price point. Less, not quite a complex design. And I do want to comment, on the use of the term AAM. I think it's absolutely appropriate. But what we try to think of AAM is more of a longer arc of change, innovation in new technologies integrated into the aviation market, and this current major inflection point around these vehicles for urban air mobility, driven predominantly by electrification, cognitive AI, advanced materials, high-speed communications, kind of coming together at a place where we see a really transformative. But we can't forget that on the broader arc of AAM, things like supersonics, hypersonics, automated flight decks, pilotless vehicles, ultimately those sorts of things are along that broader AAM journey as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we're seeing a lot of change, both kind of with the pressure of new entrants in all areas of aviation and their influence on more traditional aviation. So I think it's been a great thing to see. So Max, you referenced before some of your green initiatives. Is there anything else you wanted to get into? Because, talking about some of the new technologies in aviation, both traditional and new entrants are really putting a focus on environmental issues.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a really important topic, and it's something we're seeing massive investments in from both private industry and government across a wide variety of industries right now, from the automotive industry to the aviation industry, and recognizing the importance of it. And so by its very nature, the airplane we're building is zero emissions, but it's really important for us to understand our true impact on the grid. So looking at a life cycle analysis of, as we call it, from wells to wings. So from kind of the beginning to the end of the product cycle, as well as just understanding constantly ways we can improve our footprint. The other thing I think it's really important to talk about is the ecosystem. So because these are electric airplanes, we're going to have to charge them. And what does that mean? And there's massive investment going on right now in the electric automobile charging space. So how can we leverage that investment being put into cities and states right now for aviation? I think if we look at it, we can really leverage a lot of the things that the electric automobiles are doing. And then over time, understand where the deltas are in the aviation and auto, as well as ensuring that we lay copper and ensure charging compatibility at places like airports, building rooftops that we might be utilizing a little more and others. But it's really important to start thinking about this, because as we move through this kind of heavy investment in the space, we're hoping that this is wildly successful, and the types of numbers that the AI Deloitte study and some of the other market studies are on the low end of it. And so we really have to start preparing now for that. So that's working with Congress to get some studying and planning dollars to cities like LA and others to look at infrastructure sites, to look at charging, to look at some other parts of the grid and the multimodal nature of this, as well as how, again, we're going to integrate it into the cities. And such an important aspect of that all revolves around the sustainability of it, because this is truly zero emissions transportation that we're bringing to the masses here.
Yeah. So a lot of this is covered kind of in the study that we have been referencing. And it's a good segue again. In the title, we pose, can the United States afford to lose the race of AAM? So Robin, do you think the US is currently losing this race? And if so, what do we need to ensure these technologies are set up for future success?
Well, we're not losing the race, but we're not, let's say, driving away from the pack. And we need to be doing that. And the reason for that fundamentally is, as I talked earlier, is about, for our country to enjoy the socio and economic benefits of AAM, it's important for us to serve our domestic market first. And the way that we serve our market first is have our market evolve first. And the way and what do we need to do? I think we've all been, talking in and around how do we set up the concept of operations for urban air mobility? How do we set up the policies, the procedures, the regulation in order to frame how we operate on the ground and near the ground, how we operate in the air? Then I know something Max and his organization are looking at is how do you get aircraft certified to fly? If you can get those policies put in place, then we can create and utilize vehicles here, along with the infrastructure Max talked about, and that Selita talked about, is how do we place the infrastructure in a way we can drive scale? Once we have the opportunity to move through that scale, we'll develop the let's call it an extended aviation industrial base here in the United States. But then if we do that, we start to get the kind of job increases, the economic increases at the national level. So that's really why we need to lead, is so that we can enjoy those benefits and what the key things we need to do. And it's really about partnering across this ecosystem in a very collaborative way so that we can move with speed and purpose to be first to market, much like many technology disruptions are. If you look at this very macro level, there's an established aviation market, there's technologies that are disrupting that marketplace. And if the traditional players as well as the new entrants figure out how to adjust to that inflection point and be first to market, first mover advantage.
So I'm hearing from all of you basically partnerships and infrastructure advancements and R&D and those type of things. And Max, kind of a similar question, what do you think is necessary to push forward this technology or market?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's obviously a lot of different facets of that. So I think from the vehicle side itself, Joby's been flying full-scale airplanes since 2015. So we're really moving from development phase to execution mode now, working with the FAA to shore up our certification path, and then ultimately the execution of that, as Robin just mentioned. And again, we're on track to be certified by the FAA end of 2023, as well as have our operational certificate at that time as well to be the Part 135 or the quote unquote airliner behind this. And the FAA has really put in a good rational path for certification for all these vehicles. And excuse me for getting wonky for a second, using their Part 23 certification path, which is calling these airplanes, which they're all electric airplanes that can take off and land vertically. And so what that does is it also gives a rational path for operations. and leverages the years of experience the FAA has looking at this safely and ensuring aircraft get into the national airspace system. And so from our point of view, from that side as well, the FAA has the right path, and they've always been an international leader in this space. So to the extent they can export that and work with regulators around the world on their path is really important. And then the operational component, it's really important for companies like ours and other industry players to continue to work with people like Selita and the LA Department of Transportation, as well as cities around the world that are going to be the initial markets for this, so that when the aircrafts are ready and the airplanes are safe to get into the airspace, we're able to operate in the cities and localities where the early markets are. So from our side, it's sort of this entire ecosystem approach, and it's sort of based off a lot of those partnerships like Robin was talking about.
And a comment on something Max pointed out, it's really important. Pilots fly helicopters today under a set of flight rules that work just fine. The certification of an aircraft with a pilot in it that's electric, when that aircraft gets certified with a certified pilot, can fly those same routes and those same sorts of things that helicopters do today. So I think didn't want to advance the notion that we have to wait to 2035 to be able to fly these, but rather scaled operations with new infrastructure beyond the traditional vertiports we have today, from the top of one building over to the airport, but rather much more pervasive. But we will see these in operation when an aircraft becomes certified, because it can fly under the current flight rules with a pilot.
Okay, so I wanted to give Selita a chance to weigh in too. Is there anything, Selita, that you think might give local and city government a boost?
Yeah, and Max said something about, urban aviation expanding the sort of, the size of a city. And I think that there's something really important to kind of unpack there, which is, suburban and exurban sprawl are one of those things that plague cities like Los Angeles, Houston, Atlanta, a lot of big US cities. And it's really because we failed to build adequate amounts of affordable housing near where people want to work. And so they end up spending long amounts of time in these commutes and spending many, many additional hours getting to and from where they want to go. And that's one of the concerns we have about automation broadly, whether that's autonomous vehicles or urban aviation, is that it might re-incentivize or re-spark additional sprawl, and the consequences of that sprawl are much greater than just long commutes and air quality. It has to do with how expensive it is to get all kinds of utilities out to those places. It has to do with people ending up in places where they're isolated or not sort of achieving the kinds of social cohesion and community happiness that people really get from cities. So it's those kinds of conversations that I think will will create much more interesting outcomes, I think, in how companies are thinking about designing and deploying these services. And for those things to happen, cities really need some additional resources to dedicate to that work. I don't have at LADOT right now, an advanced air mobility planner. I don't even know where I would hire such a person and get them in through a civil service classifications system like the one we have. But I do know that historically, both at the state and federal level, one of the most profound ways that the federal government and state government influence policy is through funding streams that they create and that the requirements that they put on those funding streams. So, whether it is some seed money for some of these early markets to be able to actually invest in some planning around this, the sort of coming wave of new technology in the sky, or even better, resources to actually help local agencies plan and perhaps even build the vertiport infrastructure itself, are two kind of key ways in which I think we can expand the number of stakeholders and also get to better outcomes faster. I think that that question about who's going to build all this infrastructure is one that keeps coming up. Is it going to be private industry that builds it? Is it going to be the government that builds it? Is there some kind of combination of the two? We look at, massive infrastructure build out in the United States in our history, some huge achievements like the build out of the federal highway system that also came with some tremendous downsides because of the way in which the planning and building of those systems were done, frankly, with overtly racist decisions that resulted in really disproportionate impacts that we still really struggle with managing in cities today. And so, we know that as a country, we're able to do massive infrastructure build out. We also know that who is around the table and having those conversations is just as essential in getting technical specifications right. So the sooner we can identify funding streams to support that work, the sooner cities will be able to pay attention, and the better it will be for industry, who really needs cities in order to scale. So I think those are some of the obvious and maybe not so obvious ingredients that I think are necessary to getting urban aviation in the United States in a way that everybody feels really, really good about, and that solves real problems that we struggle with quite a bit.
Yeah, so who knows, maybe a city AAM planning expert might be a job of the future too.
Yeah,
Start with you guys.
That would be great.
All right, so as I opened with, these vehicles and operations are going to change not only the future of transportation, but is obviously going to impact our day-to-day routine. So final question for the group down the line, starting with Robin. How do you see these technologies transforming our daily lives?
I look forward to being able to have some of the last mile delivered in my place, as well as the enhanced public safety outcomes of being able to utilize these technologies.
Max.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things we've really highlighted throughout this discussion today is that the electric aviation industry, the AAM industry, UAM industry, whatever acronym we want to use, will really be a true bright spot for the future. It's going to have a positive benefit on people's lives. It's going to give people new accessibility. It's going to be affordable travel too. We didn't really talk about that, but this is really meant to be affordable for everyone Selita was referring to, so that everyone can take advantage of it. It's going to have positive benefits on the environment because it's zero emissions. And then also the economy, as Robin mentioned, it's a massive economic opportunity, and it's very good, high-paying jobs for the cities in which we're operating. So I think from our perspective, we're really excited about the future and view it as sort of a true bright spot for the future, and what can really define the next decade is this electric aviation industry.
Okay, over you to Selita.
I think that, definitely I hope it opens up a lot more career paths for people, that it creates jobs. I hope that we're able to thread the needle of, bringing in a new mode of transportation that actually contributes directly to resolving a lot of the inequality that we see in cities now that we try and work with, and that is a big challenge for us. And then I also hope that something else happens, which is that the culture of safety as a shared responsibility in the sky is something that I think the aviation industry should rightfully take some pride in. Just the mostly strong track record of keeping people safe when they're traveling in these aircraft designed by these companies, and that's because these companies share safety information with each other. It's because there's a real sort of deep dive in trying to understand anytime a crash happens, all the way back to when that plane came off of the manufacturing belt and got put into service. And I would love to see that same kind of culture of safety as a shared responsibility extend to everybody who is operating either in the air, or on the ground, in moving people around cities, because it's a very sharp contrast to what we see around automotive safety. And I think there's a huge opportunity there to bring that value into sort of transportation more broadly.
All right, I think that's all the time that we have, everyone. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I hope the people who are watching this learned a lot, and look forward to learning more about this very exciting industry.
Thank you.
Thank you.